It gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Roberta Mazza, who is Associate Professor of Papyrology at the Department of Cultural Heritage of the University of Bologna. Before going back to Italy in 2022, she was Senior Lecturer in Greco-Roman Material Culture at the Department of Classics, Ancient History, Archaeology and Egyptology at the University of Manchester, where she is still an honorary researcher. In Manchester, she was also honorary curator of the Greco-Roman Egypt at the museum and a fellow of the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. From 2015 to 2021, Roberta was a trustee of the Egypt Exploration Society and a member of the Oxyrhynchus Papyri Management Committee. Her recent book, Stolen Fragments, Black Markets, Bad Faith, and the Illicit Trade in Ancient Artefacts, was published last September by Stanford University Press. And it's based on her very extensive research on and direct involvement with manuscript collections, both recent and past. And it's on that subject that she's going to address today. So please give her a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm particularly pleased to be back to Oxford after years, the pandemic and many other problems. So what I will address today is the story of a papyrus in particular, which is one of the many I'm talking about in my book. So the focus of my talk is a papyrus fragment penned by a scribe in Egypt sometime in the early 3rd century AD. To the eyes of a lay person with no training in papyrology and ancient Greek, this piece of ancient paper would seem unassuming, even ugly, compared to a beautiful roll of the Book of the Dead or an expensive Greek book roll with verses from Homer, like the fantastic Hawara roll that you have here at the Bodleian. But any papyrologist would immediately recognize the shape of the lines of our unassuming papyrus as Sapphic stanzas and the Greek dialect as Aeolian. These could be poems by Sappho, an expert would explain to you. And she would immediately start transcribing lines and searching among known Sapphic compositions for a possible match. This is what happened 10 years ago, more or less, to this papyrus, which its discoverer and then scholars from any part of the globe established to contain the last stanzas of a lost poem, lost of course to us, in which Sappho recalls two of her brothers, followed by the beginning of another already known of her compositions. So this is the brothers' poem, and here there's the beginning of the Kypris, so-called Kypris poem, and here you can have a look at a beautiful recent translation of the brothers' poem, Papyrus poem. How could a tattered piece from an ancient manuscript like this land on the desk of a papyrologist? It can be that our papyrologist found it buried in one of the many papyrus collections formed in the last 2 centuries. You have actually the first papyrus to be identified as a Sappho fragments by your own champions, the fathers of papyrology, Arthur Hunt and Bernard Grenfell. How could a tattered piece of this can come to us then? Today, actually, the find of a new Sappho papyrus in a well-established university or museum collection is a rare event because generations of papyrologists like these two have spent their careers searching exactly for this kind of papyri in the boxes sent to Oxford and other university towns. Actually, you have the champion in this sort of search, who was Edgar Lebel, the papyrologist who followed the steps of Grenfell and Hunt, and actually was one of the most famous and prolific publisher editors of Sapphic papyri. Today, a fragment like this can still be found during archaeological excavation, hidden under the dry soil of some Egyptian location. It is fresh news that a substantial fragment with section from Euripides' tragedies has been discovered through the rests of a Roman cemetery in the Fayoum at Er Rubaiyat, the ancient necropolis of the village of Philadelphia, not many kilometers south of Cairo. Has the Sappho brothers' poem Papyrus come from recent excavations in Egypt too? Certainly not from legal ones, otherwise we would have known, and the papyrus would have never left Egypt, which instead has happened to our Sappho. Sadly, Egypt is plagued by illegal digging, and smuggled antiquities have reached the market in the order of thousands. So, yes, this can be a possible origin: illegal excavations and then smuggling from Egypt. Truth is that we don't know anything for sure about the origin of the new Sappho brothers' poem Papyrus, because those involved in its discovery and trading have gone at great length to deceive the public about the recent history of this tiny, priceless manuscript. Today, I shall explain how and why an odd mix of people tried to conceal any trace of the papyrus' most recent biography, or provenance, as we call it in academic terminology, and then I'll argue that what has happened to our Sappho papyrus matters and must not be forgotten nor forgiven. The brothers' poem Papyrus made its first public appearance in early 2014. Here you have the first big article written by the discoverer, and a sort of summary of the events that I put on my blog, which is called Faces and Voices, at the time of the announcement. It caused wild excitement not only among the experts but also in wider circles, making headlines and reaching television. Being Sappho one of the most beloved poets of antiquity, the discovery of new verses wasn't a small thing. Amidst general joy, some of us, however, were puzzled. The esteemed papyrologist who broke the news and was working on it explained that the papyrus was in the possession of a London collector who wished to remain anonymous, and that the fragment had been found hidden inside a piece of mummy cartonnage. No further information was provided at first, so the whole discovery announcement on the Times literary supplement was highly problematic for two main reasons. Current legislation regulating the circulation of Egyptian antiquities outside Egypt and through the market, and the fact that the papyrus was said to be extracted from mummy cartonnage, a problematic process in general because you have to destroy the mask of the mummy. And And in this particular case, especially, as I shall explain later in this paper. Let's start with the legislation issue. Egypt has laws regulating excavation and export of antiquities since 1835. As these laws started being issued during the colonial era, when the country was under the Ottoman and then the British empires and entangled in the war politics of the time, they were often broken, bended, and circumvented. Nevertheless, from 1835 to 1912, I hate the numbers, was still possible to legally export antiquities, including papyri, out of the country. Of course, on the ethics of these, we can have different opinions, but let's not forget that colonialism and slavery in Africa have been condemned as a crime against humanity by Europe in 2001. So, I mean, there's a problem. From 1912, and especially after the passing of the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property and related national Egyptian laws to implement the convention, any trade and export of antiquities became illegal. This means that any dealers and buyers of Egyptian antiquities, including papyri, in whatever country, had and has to comply with these laws and check that the material they traded or trade had been outside Egypt before the issuing of the new laws, and ideally that it was exported with all due permissions in good order and filed. As archaeologists and cultural heritage criminologists have explained in academic books and articles, despite these laws, the antiquities market has continued handling illegal antiquities well after 1970, with little, if any, police enforcement interventions to stop this. In the last decades, however, we have witnessed a change of direction incepted by specific government interventions, mainly driven by so-called source market countries like Italy, Turkey, Greece, and Egypt too. And some law enforcement agencies have also acted upon this problem, like the Italian Carabinieri Special Unit or the New York Antiquities Unit headed by Matthew Bogdanos. To give you a recent example concerning Egypt, oops, this one is beautiful, right? It's a little bit vulgar, but still. Bogdanos and his unit were behind the operation which led to the restitution to Egypt of a Ptolemaic golden coffin bought by the Metropolitan Museum of New York in 2017 for $4 million. The investigation was incepted by social media whistleblowers, actually people who saw the shiny woman and the coffin on social media. It seems that one of the Egyptian grave robbers who excavated the coffin vented his disappointment, for he had received nothing compared to the sum paid by the Met to the consortium of dealers who sold the coffin. The export documents provided by these dealers to the Met were then proven to be forged, and the chain of following arrests included not only dealers like Robin Deeb and Serop Simonian, who are based in Hamburg and are very well known among papyrologists because actually they sold papyri, the most impressive papyri that we have seen coming out in recent years. But even the former director of the Louvre, Jean-Luc Martinez, this was a huge thing. Public interest in and support for repatriation cases like these show that the public opinion has shifted, increasingly taking the side of legality, police enforcement, and robbed nations. Museums and other institutions, however, seem more ambivalent on taking more seriously due diligence, which is the process of checking the documentation, and legal compliances regarding their present and past acquisitions. Again, I leave aside the ethical problem, which is there, but we can discuss our eventually different views on this. But legality must be a sine qua non. The law is the law, unless we want to break any rule of civil interaction. In modern democracy, if we don't like laws, we don't break them, right? But try to make them changed. Now, how are academics, including librarians, curators, and conservators, involved in the legal and illegal antiquities market? The Met case gives some clues. Had their curators and legal departments checked carefully the provenance of the Ptolemaic coffin, the museum would have never bought this artifact, at least one would hope or think, right? Ideally, they would have gone to the police instead. There were many red flags under the purchaser's eyes. The dealers involved had been all at the center of a long list of investigations. The documents certifying legal export were copies of copies easily tampered with. The stamp on the export license did not match the one used in 1972 when the coffin was said to have been first sent to Europe. And these are all things that a good provenance researcher would have, found. Moreover, during and after the Arab Spring of 2011, episodes of looting from Egyptian museums and archaeological sites storages went out of control. Likewise, illegal digging and smuggling. In that same period, there was a spike in the number of Egyptian antiquities offered for sale in the US, UK, and other markets. Hardly a coincidence, as many archaeologists and criminologists documented and explained in multiple publications and in the press and other media too. Academics are often approached by collectors, dealers, and auction houses to vet objects and provide their expertise. Scholarly expertise is always key in the trade of antiquities and becomes of paramount importance when an ancient object is difficult to be fully appreciated by inexpert eyes, which is precisely messing with my PowerPoint, which is precisely the case of our ugly, so to speak, Sappho papyrus. This is not an aesthetically appealing masterpiece, it's small like this. The papyrus fragment's cultural and economic value stems from the text that only a papyrologist is able to unlock. It is Sappho authorship and the recovery of stanzas of a previously unknown poem that make the papyrus unique, therefore potentially priceless, which is exactly what any dealer from Christie's down to eBay accounts are desperately looking for. So, the anonymous owner and the papyrologist who broke the news of a new Sappho discovery in 2014 should have provided the public with documents attesting the legal origin of the papyrus from a mummy cartonnage, which must have left Egypt before 1970s, explaining also details of its whereabouts before 2014. But they didn't. On top of this, there was also the burning problem of the supposed origin from mummy cartonnage. Besides this being a highly problematic practice, you need to destroy an archaeological object to obtain the papyri back because they are contained in this sort of papier-mâché. Any papyrologist knows that the use of discarded ancient papyri to make the sort of papier-mâché used to cover the face and other body parts of the dead stopped with the Roman occupation of Egypt in 30 BC, more or less. This meant that the new Sappho papyrus in question, paleographically dated to the 3rd century AD, so after Christ, could have not been found in mummy cartonnage of this sort. So why telling this story then? When I first read the article in the Times Literary Supplement, I was puzzled and started asking questions. Could the discoverer tell us what documents attested that the papyrus was legal? How did he explain the mummy cartonnage problem? Did the editors of the Times Literary Supplement fail plain fact-checking? Did they ask any papyrologist to review the article while in draft? While the discussion over the fragment got wider and increasingly heated, no firm answer was given, ever. And I'm still. Few months after its public surfacing, the brothers' poem Papyrus was published in a German academic journal, and it was officially accepted in the Sapphic corpus. By that point, I was no more puzzled, I was outraged. The academic stamp meant that not only the academic community did not bother about any of the legal and ethical issues flagged by some of us, but also that it was complicit in causing a steep increasing of the capital in the hands of the mysterious London collector. Let that sink in for a second. Professors paid by taxpayers to teach and do research were involved in a process, scientific publications, the first and following, that at the end had financial implications for the owner of the manuscript. Are we professors working for public benefit or for private citizens' profit? It's not only, it's a collective sin. Lo and behold, the academic publication revealed that the discoverer and the Papyrology Guild allowing him to move on were benefiting not only the London collector, but also an American family of millionaires. The Green, owners of Hobby Lobby, a successful chain of arts and crafts stores and other business, who in 2009 started amassing a collection of antiquities and other biblical artifacts to be later exhibited in a museum, the Museum of the Bible of Washington, D.C. This is actually a picture that was taken the night when the museum opened in November 2017. The brothers' poem Papyrus was not the only new Sappho fragment to have been found, we learned. In the process of dismounting the piece of cartonnage, the collector had allegedly found other fragments, all originally coming from the same 3rd century book roll containing the brothers' poem. Once out of the cartonnage, the London collector resold the smaller fragments through the market, about 26 tiny fragments, and the Greens bought those. So this is an article where actually the author shows that a green fragment, this one, matches with our brother's poem Papyrus, so there's no doubt that they belonged together. As the story was getting more and more complex, and I did not give up going to the bottom of it, further pieces of information were slowly released. The cartonnage was not mummy cartonnage, but a clump of papyri pasted together for some other use to ease out, the problem of the dating, such as book covering. And it had a legit origin, the discoverer stated without giving us proofs. However, it was part of a classicist collection auctioned at Christie's London on November 28th of 2011. While I was chasing these and other papyri, because the Green had actually bought something like 5,000 papyri besides the Sappho 26, public pressure on the Green collection and the Museum of the Bible and their questionable acquisition methods increased. After the feds started seizing antiquities from them, the Tower of Lies built to hide the true origin of the new Sappho fragments started crumbling down. 2017 was a crucial year, as I explain in the book, because many other antiquities were on the spot. Sure, some of us were keeping the pressure, but the truth is that it was the arrival of law enforcement agents at Hobby Lobby and the Museum of the Bible quarters that opened the door to the release of a flood of information unknown up to that moment. I must add that it was not only the feds, but also the arrival that year, more or less, of two persons, very important for the story, who are Jeff Gloa, who was the head of collections there until few months ago when he left the museum, and Professor Mike Holmes. These two men helped, excavating into these and other stories. In 2019, Professor Mike Holmes, a biblical scholar employed by the Museum of the Bible, made it public that the new Sappho discoverer, an Oxford University professor, had sold papyri and other antiquities to the Green family over the years. And some of these papyri, never delivered but paid for, in fact belonged to the Egypt Exploration Society collection deposited in Oxford. As you know, the ownership is with the society, but you are the custodian. It later transpired that other papyri belonging to the same collection had been stolen and then traded, and an investigation is still ongoing. So I won't talk about these. We are all very grateful to the police, and we are waiting to know how this will end. In the meanwhile, it must be said, in the United States, a court has condemned the seller of the papyri, the Oxford professor, to refund the buyers, so the Green family. So there is some firm points, so to speak, in this story. In this commotion, Professor Holmes decided to release information regarding the Sappho fragments in the Green collection. According to documents in their possession, Mr. Steve Green bought these in January 2012 from a Turkish dealer based in Istanbul with an eBay account and a flat in London too, whom I knew very well, Mr. Jakub Eksioglu. I let you discover how I met this interesting character from the book, so go and buy the book. It's a long story. So the green New Sappho fragments did not come from Christie's London, but from a compressed clump of papyri. This is one clump with some Sappho pasted on it, probably of modern origin. Back in early 2015, when the alleged provenance from the Christie's auction was provided, I did contact Christie's manuscript curator Eugenio Donadoni. He said in January 2015 that there wasn't any image of the papyrus in the shape of cartonnage clamp sold in that famous lot 1 of 2011, but he was sure that it was from there. While I was exchanging emails with Mr. Donadoni, his Christie's department was in fact pulling together a catalog for the private sale of our brother's poem Papyrus, and it contained indeed pictures of the finding of the brother's poem Fragment from some compressed cartonnage. The catalog was submitted for consideration to a group of selected potential buyers, very wealthy ones. It transpired that the asking price was 12 millions. So remember the coffin for this one, 12. But its existence, the existence of the catalog, remained unknown to academics and the public until November 2019, when a PDF copy of it landed in the email box of my colleague Mike Sampson, professor of classics at the University of Manitoba and the author of the article on the screen. Based on his analysis of the metadata of the digital contents of the PDF file, later corroborated by The Guardian too, Sampson concluded that the papyrus had been offered for sale most probably twice, in 2013 and then in 2015. But more important than anything else were the timestamps and other features of the digital images in the catalog illustrating the alleged recovering of the Sappho fragments from the famous papyrus cartonnage clamp. They proved that the pictures were taken after the first public display of the green fragments, so they were already there, and had been staged to support the provenance narrative concocted for the papyrus. All details in the book. If the provenance from a clump of pressed papyri sold at a Christie's auction was staged, then where do the new Sappho fragments come from? As I said at the beginning, it is impossible for us to know because all the people who have handled these fragments have made any possible effort to hide the truth. Mr. Exioglu declares to this day that the fragments were in both. He stated to this reporter of the Atlantic that both he was the seller of the green Sappho and also the brother's poem, were in possession of his family since the 1940s. Personally, I don't believe his words for reasons, again, which I explain in the book. So could the fragments have been stolen from library or museum collections? I tend to exclude this because especially the largest fragment is very appealing and immediately recognizable. So no papyrologist would have ever, missed a fragment like this, let's say in Oxford or in Manchester. Could they come from recent illicit excavations in Egypt? Maybe. I see this as the most probable origin, but I cannot prove it. It is just an educated guess. So I want to be clear here that is the truth as an argument of an academic is not legal truth. So the police does one job, I do my job. Current field. Mr. Green and his museum have learned a lesson from their past highly questionable collection methods. They sent back to Oxford the fragments which were identified as belonging to the Egypt Exploration Society. This was headline all over the world, and repatriated to Egypt most of the papyri and other Egyptian antiquities bought over the years. Of the about 5,000 ancient Egyptian items collected, only 44 papyri remain in the Museum of the Bible. The around 26 new Sappho fragments, which Mr. Green had acquired from Mr. Exioglu, are part of those 5,000 items. Is the brothers' poem Papyrus going to follow the fate of its sister, of course they are female, papyri? Where is it, by the way? Where is it? While we were chasing its whereabouts for years and despairing about its fate, the brothers' poem Papyrus was placidly resting in a safe at Christie's in central London. It was finally consigned to the police in the spring of 2022. The story I'm telling in the book and repeat today is very personal, and it seems that my relationship with our unassuming but pricey Sappho papyrus is destined to last. Imagine, this is a papyrus I'm chasing since February 2014. I have seen my Sappho in many digital formats that I showed you today. In the flesh, only once. Months after it was taken from Christie's, I was asked by the police to confirm that the brothers' poem Papyrus was genuine. I answered that the only way for me to confirm was to see it for real. And so I took a flight from Bologna to the UK, my expenses, of course, and was finally allowed to meet the brothers' poem Fragment. Background is modified by artificial intelligence, but that's me with the papyrus. It was a most moving encounter. It lasted too shortly, but never mind. I was over the moon because I felt that the fragment was finally in safe hands and hopefully on its way back to its ultimate owners, the people of Egypt. But alas, our brother's poem Papyrus continued moving around. When my book came out last September, a journalist got in contact to write a piece. She started drafting an article and contacted the Oxford Thames police to vet my story, as journalists always do. It turned out that the papyrus has kept on moving. A policeman phoned me some time after to say that the brothers' poem Papyrus was no more under their custody. It was given back to the owner for reasons he was not at liberty to disclose. Of course, there is an investigation ongoing, and this is absolutely in line with the policies. Of course, also the identity of the owner should not be known. But in the book, I explain that based on the evidence I collected, so it's the evidence of an academic, the papyrus can only belong to 3 people, individually or in co-ownership. The papyrologist who discovered it, or 2 dealers involved in the story, Alan Baidoun, based in Israel, and Mahmoud Elder, an American citizen. Knowing that the fragment could be back with people who deceived us for years, my heart sank. As an academic, I felt at loss, but as a responsible citizen, I had to accept that there must be good reasons behind the police decision. I asked, of course, I always ask, why this happened, but the reasons remain undisclosed to this day, and I respect that. So, why am I so passionate about the fate of the fragment? Why are papyrologists, classicists, and many other people so invested in getting their hands on a papyrus like this? I can offer my own answer. Because we are condemned to the loss of the archaeological context in which the new Sappho fragments were found, I can only imagine how the original book roll came to life in 3rd century Egypt and ended buried under the soil. Mine is, of course, a well-informed historical imagination. I do this for a living, right? So I imagine a curious reader and perhaps writer, someone with a passion for difficult, archaic Greek poetry. This person could have been a member of the local Egyptian aristocracy, living or just owning a country house, right, in some villages or towns like Philadelphia that we mentioned before, Oxyrhynchus, Hermopolis, who knows. Maybe they got hold of a copy of the Sappho book from the library of a friend and entrusted a professional scribe or one of their own slaves to copy it. Would the commissioner be a man or a woman, or a couple, or a group of friends sharing a same passion? I cannot say. But I'd like to think that there was a woman involved, and indeed there are profiles of wealthy landladies attested in papyri and other sources with the education and means to get the book copied. I offered here, just for fun, 2 examples. One, the papyrus is a land lease from a woman, Flavia Longina Petronilla, of course through the husband, who owned some properties in the Fayum, and it's dated 200 to 208, so more or less the date of our papyrus, and also one of the beautiful mummy portraits that we have in Manchester. So Manchester, fun, this is all Manchester. The Brothers' poem Papyrus has repairs, ancient repairs on the back, which means that the book roll had a long life. Before being discarded, it was perused and beloved. At some point, however, it must have become obsolete. Perhaps the roll broke in different points, a new copy was made, and this superseded, or new generations of the owner's household lost interest in Aeolic Greek, that after all is difficult to study, as many of us know. I can go on for hours telling you potential histories generated by my encounter with this papyrus. With the help of generations of students and colleagues, maybe there will be even a time in the future when we will be able to repaste the real story of this book together. But we need the object, right? And we don't have it. But what really matters in the context of this talk is not the remote story of the brothers' poem Papyrus as a fact, as reality, but rather the beauty and value of a collective effort, the effort of generations of students and scholars to dig into the past and tell stories about those who came before us and how they are still here with us through the artifact. Is this a way to overcome death and human finitude, to give meaning to human life? Perhaps it is. Certainly it is a way to remind humans that we are part of something bigger and longer than we suspect. The more people the fragment meets, the more stories will be generated. I value the polyphony created by multiple encounters, the many different voices and stories, including those of the Egyptians, from which we have taken away these and other objects. It is time to give something back and to make space for other voices. For once, let this be a chorus, a choir, led by someone else. You see now where my attraction to papyri and papyrology stems from. There is a small universe brought back to life when papyrus fragments like the Sapphos meet any one of us. And I want mine to be just one of the many possible stories retold by one of the million possible encounters between human beings and papyrus fragments. This is why not only the Brothers' poem fragment, but any other papyrus on earth must be publicly available and under the best possible care. And please don't tell me that we have digital images, because digital is not the same as real, and digital objects fade away too. I want the artifact. I am against the antiquities trade, at least in its current incarnation, and I am against private ownership of ancient manuscripts when it threatens public access and long-term preservation. So not in principle, but when it is a threat. And I think I have given good arguments to support my position in the book and today in my paper. In conclusion, I do hope that the Oxford Thames Valley Police had very good reasons to give the Brothers' poem fragment back to the owners, because the loss of it would be no small responsibility to bear. It would be like killing Sappho and all those in history who have been passionate about her poetry. And we are many.